So I am here very early in the morning UK time, evening Australia time, with my lovely, lovely friend David Cowan, who most of you know very well. And we are going to be having a really important conversation today, I think, something that the two of us have been talking about a lot off camera, about how to deal with leaving relationships in terms of letting friends go. How do you know when it's the time? What emotions does that bring up to you? What are the benefits? What are the downsides of it? Because from the messages we get and from personal experiences, it seems to be something that has really come to the forefront over the last few years for people. It's been very, very obvious, raised things with everything, the difference of opinions people have had. It's probably accelerated some of this process. So before we get into the nitty gritty, David, how are you in general and how is Australia?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Catherine. It's great to see you again. And I'm doing great overall. I mean, everything seems to be going well. I've got working on my health, as you know, a lot in over the last, well, probably close to a year now. I think it's been quite a while, but really a lot more in the last probably 6 months. And there's still things that I'm working on, but yeah, feeling great. And as far as Australia goes, I don't know, like I said to you off camera, you can never really tell what's going on. And on the surface, things seem like one way, whether good or bad, but behind the scenes, who knows, really? It could be the exact opposite of that. And I know that the TGA, which is the Therapeutic Goods Administration here, which, you might have heard of it, they banned one of the things. Yeah, that was interesting. They actually banned it. Of course, I found out about it about 3 weeks after it had happened, and they didn't tell anybody. They didn't say it's not on the media or anything. So, you know,
It is interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think we're seeing similar things here, but I'm not the best person to talk about what's happening in the UK because honestly, I haven't got a clue. I'm like a little hermit in my woods at the moment, and I really enjoy
yeah,
that. So, and what
yeah,
I've realised is this will come on to our subject matter for today is I've really been thinking a lot about, the last 3 years has really shown up for so many of us in terms of letting go of relationships, because a lot of people's really strong opinions about what's gone on in the last 3 years has really highlighted similar core values or different core values. And I think what a lot of people have done is they've sort of and myself included, is you can sort of leave certain friendship groups or communities of friends when you no longer feel part of it, and sometimes rush into other ones, and then over time sort of find out, okay, are those still serving you or not, or are they growing apart? And I've gone through quite a lot on a personal level of letting go of some, well, I'll rephrase that, David. I'm not sure. Some of them are relationships that I've let go of, and some of them are
yeah.
relationships that they've let go of me. It's been very mixed, actually. And it's been really interesting to see the emotions that that provokes, and sort of look at that with a different perspective to how I would have done a few years ago. Looking at, with, as Don Miguel Ruiz says, not taking anything personally and sort of saying, well, actually, sometimes both sides of the equation, whoever lets go of the relationship can be doing the other one a big favor as well. How's that been playing out in your life? Oh, I think you've frozen. We've just lost Dave on the internet at the moment, so just waiting for him to come back in. Just restarting again because we lost David's internet and things, but it was perfect timing, David, because I was just saying about some relationships I've let go of and some relationships other people have let go of me. And at that time you popped off. So I was like, oh, that's another relationship gone then. But he's back, so we're not
Yeah,
over yet.
yeah.
So
Gave you a second chance.
it was hysterical. So how's that been playing out in your life then? Have you noticed a shift of your relationships, and what's the emotional impact of that?
Yeah, it's funny because you mentioned, you've let go of some and other people have let go of the others. And I think, and I've done the same. It hasn't been many, but in fact, I could count all of them combined on one hand, of the ones I know of, actually, but it's interesting when you're the person doing it versus the other way around, and you get to experience it from both sides. But in my case, I know that I actually, like, the person knows why.
Yes.
Whereas I have no idea. Like, I have no idea why a person doesn't want to speak to me or see me or whatever anymore. They just kind of, you know what I mean? So to answer your question, yeah, it's interesting, and you're only left to guess. Like, all you can do is assume. So you can rack your brain. It could be one of any number of things, but you just be guessing, and you may get it right, you may get it wrong. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
It's fascinating. I think we should dig into that a bit more, because we've had quite a few discussions about this sort of off screen, and it's this fascination, isn't it, about who has made that decision. And I think it's really, really helpful and quite healthy to be experiencing it from both sides of the equation. And it's funny how exactly the same has happened with me, David. So the ones where I've moved away of, there's been a conversation. Actually, they've all been, well, from my perspective, really nice ones. So again, it'd be interesting to see how the other people feel them, because it's not been any blame involved. It's just been recognizing that we're on different paths at the moment, and who knows where we all might be in a year's time. But the people that have let go, there's again, same with me. It's less than 5. It's probably only 3 actually. But where they've let go of me, well, actually 2, where they've let go of me, there's been no explanation or no willingness to open up or talk about it at all. And it's really interesting. And obviously I have to respect that. But equally, when I was looking at working through that and thinking, the signs were on the wall actually a long while before. And when I looked at the relationships and how they'd been for a long, long while, from my perspective, the relationships have been very one-sided. A lot of me checking in with them and very little of them checking in with me. And this seems to come up a lot with, particularly, I think a lot of people that watch us are very much empaths and have gone through stages of their lives, whether they are now or not, of being people pleasers. And I think what's often happens is when something really hits your core belief, so whatever that might be, whether it's animal rights, whether it's what's gone on for the last few years, when something you're really, really passionate about and it's a non-movable boundary, that can be a massive trigger for people, I think.
Yeah. I'm sure we've all experienced that more than we care for over the last few years. I think I had a thought, but I forgot what it was. I'm sure it'll come back. But what would you say are some of the things that you noticed over that those interactions, apart from it being one-sided, that you realized when looking back it was quite obvious that this was going to happen in the end?
Yeah, what I'd realized is I've been the type of person that has always changed a lot. I've had a lot of different career paths. I've changed, careers a lot, whereas a lot of my friendship group have sort of left university, been in the same career all the time. And I'm not saying one's better than the other at all. But what I had noticed looking back is a lot of resentment from people. And what I sort of was picking up from it, and some of this has come from conversations and some is me making assumptions, is that people compare themselves a lot. And obviously it's so much worse now with the age of social media. When I grew up and my university friends, we didn't have social media. So we didn't have that extra pressure. If you want to look at it as a pressure, I mean, like we've said before, all of these tools can be used for the good. They can all be used for the bad. But I think when people can find it very, very challenging if they see people who are not happy with areas of their life doing something about it. And I've always been, even when I was young at school, I was always the smallest in my class, and my twin sister was always the biggest. But we always stood up to the bullies, and we always really, there's one thing that triggers me more than anything is to see someone being bullied, whether it's an animal or a person. And I've always stood up for that. I think the difference is now, as the older I've got and the more confident in myself I've got, I've realized I don't have to justify certain things as much. So a lot of my friends that have sort of left my sort of world, almost from the scientific community, And you know, there's this thing about, is it real science? Can you justify yourself in the academic world? Can you? And I've moved away from that way of doing it. I've moved away much more into the intuition, the feeling as a mother. If I've got a strong opinion, you know, none of us can be right all the time, but the ability to say sorry and make mistakes is has really come to the forefront of this. And what I realized in a lot of the relationships is I was pandering to their needs and the one that would always sort of make the peace, but there was never anything coming back. And I think I just got to a stage where on both sides, where people let go of me or let go of that, I thought, well, actually, no, this needs to be more of an equal opinion. And I'm very happy to sit there and let you express your opinion, but equally, I expect that same respect back. And if I did express my opinion, and if it doesn't match you, I haven't. It's really weird, David. I know this is a long-winded answer, but I genuinely do not have a need for people to agree with me. I think people find that really, really hard. I love finding out different people's opinion, and I don't need us to agree. There would be some deal breakers on that if it's something to do with core values. You know, I wouldn't be friends with someone who is an animal abuser or a child abuser. But on other things, I find it really fascinating when people have got a different of opinion. But what I found is I had a lot of friendship groups where people were very much, that's my opinion. I've heard it, you know, had it for 20 years, and I don't want to talk about anything that challenges that opinion. I'm happy to talk gossip about my neighbor. I'm happy to gossip about my work colleague, people that I don't know, have this trivial small talk, but I'm not prepared to have those conversations about what I would consider life-changing issues. And I just suddenly thought, do you know what? My time's too valuable. I can't be having this, you know. So, but I do think you hit on a really important point about experiencing it from both sides, because when you've experienced people letting go of you in friendships and you letting go of others, how's that, what impact has that made on you, David, and how you deal with those situations?
Well, it gives you introspection, doesn't it? Because you have to then wonder why somebody, like, what did you do? Like, did I do something bad, or did I piss them off? Or I don't think I did, you know, because if I did, I would probably know about it. Like, you would know if you piss somebody off, you go, okay, that was the reason. But when somebody does something, which I've told you about, you know, privately, that makes you think, and you go, well, what's happened? Like, where did we go wrong, or what? And I relate to the people pleaser thing too. I used to be a massive people pleaser, and it was always checking in on people and doing things. And there's nothing wrong with checking in on people, of course. That's what friends do, but it is often, I think, when it's like any relationship. When you give yourself so much to something, it's going to be one side. A relationship's always going to be a little bit one-sided. You know, it's going to be a little bit give and take. But when you invest so much into something, then it automatically makes the other person invest less. I believe, because they automatically, consciously or not, would probably take you for granted. And then when you pull away, ordinarily you wouldn't normally pull away, but when you go through a growth phase or multiple growth phases, and then you realize what's going on, maybe consciously or unconsciously, and you stop kind of feeding that, whatever it is, and you pull away, then it really kind of puts the relationship to the test, doesn't it? Because then if you were really that important to them, then they would reach out to you too. And then I think that when they don't, it's really interesting. And then what you said about, you know, the growth and everything, when people see that your life has been this one way this entire time, for as long as they've known you, you've been a quiet, you're unconfident, you don't really, like, you haven't been living up to your full potential, and they know that you're smart, but you don't really, you know, you're doing whatever it is, the job or whatever. But when they start seeing you achieve things outside of the norm, then that could definitely trigger them to wonder what they're doing with their life.
Yeah. With the relationships, with what you've been through, do you think, I mean, we're not going to name anyone on here or make, you know, say circumstances that people can identify with, but one thing that really hit home me is, I think, when I look back as to when these relationships started in my life, I was a very different person then. So a lot of these long-term
Yeah.
relationships, which have hit me quite hard with them breaking up, whichever way it's gone, whoever's done it, for me, I suddenly realized it's not really relevant who's done it. Whoever has made that break has done it for a reason, whether I understand that or not, or whether they've chosen to share that or not. So I have
Yeah.
reached a stage, I didn't get there very quickly, but I've reached a stage where I completely accept that. But when I could then get outside that emotional stage of it and sort of think more about it objectively, I realized, wow, I can completely see why, because the person I was back then, I'm such a different person now that
Mm.
if we'd met for the first time now, would we even be friends in the first place?
Probably
And I
not.
realized no, from both sides of the equation. And that
Yeah.
for me was really, really helpful realization to be, is just like, actually, we've both changed, just in different directions. How does that fit in with what you've noticed?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, from my experience, the people that are in my life, or sorry, were in my life, they haven't really changed at all. And it doesn't matter. As long as one person changes, that's all that matters. Because
Yeah.
it's really like you say, if you met them at a bar or whatever, and you happen to have a conversation with them, and you're finding stuff about each other out, is that a person that you'd want to see again? And the answer is probably no. It's
Yeah.
it's going to be no. So, and I think about that because what's the reason most people become friends with somebody? Usually, it's because they're in the same class, or like it. There's nothing. There's, really, it's nothing deeper than that. It's so shallow.
Mm.
I mean, apart from the fact that, yeah, you get along, you know
Mm.
what I mean, and they're a nice person, hopefully. Then it's really just that, though. It's like, okay, I went to school with that person. You're not going to be friends with everybody in your class, of course, but there are a few people that you gravitate toward for different reasons. Uh, but then when you look back at it, from in my experience, of all the people, that I was friends with, that I once considered friends, uh, the biggest thing that we have in common is that we were born in the same year, or that we all used to like getting really drunk and stuff. And now that I don't drink, and that's another thing, is like when you stop doing those activities,
Mm.
your vibration changes massively, because
Yeah.
alcohol is such a massive vibration killer. And it's not just that, because then you have more time to go and work on yourself and work on your career or your life or whatever. So you're automatically doing all these extra things that you wouldn't normally do. And while the other people, and there's no right or wrong here, but the other people are still doing the same things that they've always done. And so you naturally a vibrational mismatch as well. And that's why you never call them, they never call you. It's like it's just there's so many things at play, but I think that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah. I don't, it is. It is really interesting. And another big indicator for me is how they make you feel. Do you feel excited if you're thinking about connecting with them? Do those that lift your energy? Even if you're talking about quite difficult things, one of you might be going through something different, but it still is a positive experience. I've met a couple of really, really new friends now that we could have. One lady, won't mention the name, who we were speaking to yesterday on the phone, and it's just been so wonderful where you meet people where you can have really great honest conversations, bit like we do, and you'll really value each other's opinion. But the next question I want to ask you, how do you think the fact that so many of us spend so long on the internet has affected people's ability to maintain and hold down relationships?
Well, in some ways, it's very, very good, because you can reach out to somebody halfway across the world at any point in time and send them a message. And
Mhm.
yeah, somebody like Catherine. Uh, but I think on the other hand, it definitely can offer a very false. You can throw up a facade, and a lot of people that post all these pictures and photos and stuff of them doing the best things on their social media will never show you anything else
Yeah.
apart from that. They never show you the bad times. And everybody experiences bad times, but from those, if you take a snapshot of their life, it's like, oh, they're always on holiday, or they're always having a great time. You know, um, yeah, I think there's something to be said for that. I don't post anything on social media. I only did over the last few years because I felt like I needed to.
Mm.
But I'm a very private person. I don't want people knowing what I'm up to, and most of the time, And if I'm working on a goal or multiple things at any one time, I'm probably not going to post about it either, because there's nothing worse than saying I'm going to achieve X, Y, Z and then doing none of it. I want to be able to achieve what I achieve in a given in a given time, and let the results speak for themselves once it's done.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think I 100% agree with you. It can be a really good thing and a bad thing. I think a lot of people have connected with other like-minded people, and it's been an absolute, lifesaver when perhaps you've had major disagreements within your families. You've realized that your core beliefs are very different, and that's a real hard hit, because your whole sense of security can go. And again, that's both things. I mean, my sisters don't feel secure with my decision making at all. They think I've been trying to kill people. So, again, when we're saying this, we're not stupid enough to think that we're right and they're wrong. It's not about that at all. It's about seeing life through a completely different lens. And anyone who thinks that anyone who I think is completely mad with their point of view, I can absolutely guarantee they think the same about me. So once you realize that,
Right.
it becomes quite amusing. But equally, on the serious side of things, you can have what was a perceived security net pulled away from you very quickly, and that can be very isolating. I mean, I'm very lucky because I've got 2 kids that sort of semi come and go from home because they're big now. We've got a husband, got loads of animals, so I have got people around and beings around me. That the animals are a lifesaver. But a lot of people haven't, and so therefore reaching out on the internet can be really, really important. I think the downside of it can be that you can have this perception of what someone's like, and we've seen it a lot in certain communities that have been speaking out, and then when you actually find out a little bit more, it's this danger again, coming back to the 4 agreements. Don't make assumptions. And of course we do all make assumptions as humans, and then when those expectations are not met from your standards that you've put on someone else, that was all an assumption, it can all come crashing down again. So what I've learned from that is just to accept that, relationships are fluid.
Sure. Yeah.
And if it's important enough, you will fight for it. So I've got a few really long-term friends left, and we've been through different times, because when it's been a friendship group and a couple of you are logging heads, and there's always some that are a bit piggy in the middle, it's a bit like if a couple divorce or separate and you've got joint friends. It's like, whose side do you take, or can you continue to be friends with both of them? Those situations, I think, what is really obvious is if a relationship is worth having, both parties will fight for it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think when you're on the personal growth journey, it's a very lonely journey anyway. So it's not like when you're hit with something like that, like you've probably already decided that you haven't seen that person in years anyway, or spoken to them. It's just when they pull away, like massively pull away, to the point where it's now very obvious, because you've pulled away too. But when it's cemented, and I think it's when it's on the shoes on the other foot, that's when things can kind of, that's when you kind of go, okay, well, what happened there? But it's just interesting, isn't it? Because there are other, I would bet that in the example that I gave you, I would bet that there are other people who haven't spoken to that person just as much as I haven't, yet he hasn't severed ties with them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's funny. I don't know, but I think when you're on that lonely path, you've gotten so used to it too. Like I'm so used to being isolated in that way, because there have been very, very, very few people that I could actually share my experiences with, because nobody has experienced what I've experienced.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's very difficult unless I meet them online. So yeah, when you're in that position and you kind of take it in your stride, like you become a stronger person anyway. So it's not like it's not the end of the world, but it just causes you to think, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that that self-development that you get through it, having to process those emotions and thoughts and how it's making you feel, is such an important point of your personal growth, because it does make you look really hard when circumstances.
Yeah, yeah,
We're being a bit cryptic because we don't want to say too much that sort of identifies certain people, because that wouldn't be fair. But when something happens where it's very obvious you sort of been singled out and sort of left out of a gathering or something like that, it does make you really look in and do that introspection. So what are some of the things that you've learned about yourself from that? What growth have you actually achieved from having to go through that process?
just before I answer that, I wanted to bring something up that I think is related, and it's this quote that I heard that a friend of mine posted once, and it goes, um, your impression or opinion of me is a reflection of you, and my reaction to you is a consciousness of me. And I thought about that, because you know how sometimes, I'm sure everybody's met somebody who thinks that you act a certain way, or this person acts a certain way, or this person acts a certain way, but actually it's them that it's acting
Yeah,
that way, you know? And I kind of wondered, okay, well, that's true to a degree, but where do you draw the line? Like, where does it become, well, that's actually me doing it, you know what I mean? Or the other, you know what I
yeah.
mean? Rather than a reflection. Uh, yeah, what do you think about that?
I think that's a really important point, and it's something that's been coming up for me big time. I've said this on a few of my interviews this week, and I can never pronounce his name properly. Nassim Harim, the
Okay, yeah,
physicist, and I love his work. I think he's absolutely amazing. And one of the things he was talking about was when someone was talking about, us all create our own reality. Well, only to a point, because regardless of whether you call it God, quantum entanglement, the divine matrix, we've also got this collective consciousness. So we all know that you can get 10 friends in a book club and you can all read the same book and you'll all pick out different bits of it because you're viewing it through your lens, through your experience at the moment. Similarly, you can all be at the same party, and if you had to give a police statement afterwards, you'd all give completely different ones because you've all been at the same event but had a very different experience. So I think for what you were saying, that's so important, because that's why we've all got different perceptions. And I think this is what's so hard, because when you go on that personal development journey, you start to realize that your perception isn't real. It's just your perception. You're seeing it through your lens of your consciousness, your emotions, your baggage, your learning. But equally, the others are. But a lot of people, until they go on a personal journey, a development journey, they don't realize that. They 100% think that their perception of the situation is right. And this is where I think it all goes wrong and pear-shaped, because you that everyone's perception of the same event can have a very different understanding. That's why witness statements are so difficult for police, because that person may genuinely really 100% believe that's what they saw or what they heard, but when they've done studies with it, they've worked out that most of it is not true. Our eyes can deceive us based on what we want to see. And even in terms of memories that we have, say from childhood, again, a lot of psychologists have done studies on that and realized that a lot of our memories are made up. They change over time. And I've got one friend who's
yeah,
hysterical, who really obviously exaggerates everything. But we all know that, and it's quite funny. But what we don't realize is that we're all doing it on our own way, just to different degrees. And she's conscious that she's exaggerating it, and it's part of her personality, whilst a lot of us are doing it at an unconscious level, and we don't realize that. So I think this is the thing. This is where some of these, really basic principles of, it took me a long while to get what anyone else thinks of me is none of my business, but I actually get it now. Doesn't mean it's easy to apply, but I actually get it, because I cannot control their perception of me. Their perception of me
yeah,
will be so, yes, I can do my best to try and put it across in a way that's helpful, but equally they will have so many inherent beliefs themselves and things that they're processing. How they choose to view that, there's not too much I can do about it.
yeah. I know somebody who's described bunch of different people. And every time I hear them describing these people, it seems like that to me, it sounds like they're describing themselves, but they can't see it. You know,
Yeah.
it's quite funny. So to answer your question about how it's affected me, or what have I thought about, and what kind of, you know, what have I been thinking about, you know, what we spoke about before. I think it definitely causes you to wonder why, and then you think, you go, well, am I super upset? I mean, in some cases, yes. In other cases, I wouldn't even go to it, even if I was invited. You
Yeah.
know, like, and that's not talking about necessarily. That's not all things, but there's some things like, uh, you know, a friend of mine asked me, "Hey, say, are you going to this person's Bucks party, you know, next week?" I said, "No, I haven't been invited." And you know, I probably wouldn't even go any if I was invited. I don't do those things anymore, so it doesn't bother me so much. You know, I'd much rather do something, you know, be productive and actually achieve something that night, rather than losing brain cells and, you know, seeing strippers. You know,
Yeah.
not that I haven't done that before. There's nothing wrong with that, but you know, just different different things. You know, it's just different things float my boat these days.
Yeah, completely. And that is really important. You know, we're meant to grow. You know, it would be a bit odd if at my age, mid-50s, I was still behaving as I did when I was at college. I mean, that would be odd.
Yeah,
That'd be a sign that you know, that I hadn't necessarily addressed certain areas of my life. There's a reason why you do things. You even see it with my dogs. You know, my dogs now are 6, and they've really behaved very differently to how they did when they were a year old. And that's completely normal. And I think understanding that you go through these changes in life, and you know, it's not that every older person has to behave a certain way. I'm not saying that at all, but you do get much more selective, I think, as you go through and you learn these life lessons. You realize how valuable your time is, and how you don't necessarily want to. So most of the people now that I'm currently friends with, we're not really interested in small talk. You know, none of us watch television anymore.
I hate
We
small
don't
talk.
watch
Yeah,
soap operas. We don't want to spend our time gossiping about other people, because we know we're going to feel really bad about ourselves if we engage in that behavior. But we do
yeah,
find out about what the hell's happening in the world, and but from a mindset of not pretending we've got the answers. And I love those conversations, because I come out of it feeling energized and alive and curious. Because the one thing you know, there is a place for boring or not inviting drama into your life, but even look at that word. You know, how many people have realized that actually a lot of us invite a lot of drama into our lives, and how nice it is when we're not inviting that, and we can actually have gratitude and be happy for doing very simple things in life. You know, we don't have to have these huge highs and lows all the time.
yeah. The problem is a lot of people are unconsciously addicted to drama,
Yeah.
or even their own struggles. Because, for instance, if somebody is not earning the money that they want to earn, and they're always, you know, struggling with things, it's comfortable. It's not comfortable, but it's comfortable for their mind, if that makes sense. Like, yeah, they're uncomfortable. They're just scraping by. But anything outside of that is uncomfortable. Is more uncomfortable, because if it wasn't, they would do something about it, right?
Mhm.
And so they're addicted to this comfort, and that could be one of any number of things. And that's why. And it sounds funny, like you're addicted to your struggles. It sounds weird. Like, why would anybody want to, you know, want more of what they don't like? But it makes perfect sense when you understand the human condition and how the mind works. Because you know, it's everything will be uncomfortable, and changing is more uncomfortable than the current situation.
Completely. I love the way Bruce Lipton talks about it, because, you know, going back to what you said earlier about how a lot of people, you'll hear friends talking about certain things and they're describing people, and you're thinking they're really talking about yourselves. Well, Bruce Lipton makes me laugh so much. And he sort of says, you know, we've all got this person, call him Bob. And then you'll say to Bob one day, oh my gosh, you're so like your dad. And everyone can see it but Bob. And Bob goes into a
Yeah,
rage and says, I'm nothing like my dad. But therein size up, you know, how much we are all controlled by our subconscious programming. And
Yeah.
it's really hard to get to a stage where you've done enough other work to see that and see your patterns. And I laugh about it now because I have absolutely been addicted to drama in the past. I've been addicted to problem solving, because I was very good at solving problems. And then one day someone said to me, you know, be sure you're not an arsonist firefighter. You know, are you creating problems so that you can
Yeah, right.
solve them? And I just thought, my God, yeah, absolutely,
That's
yeah.
great. Yeah. Interesting.
But if they'd have said that to me 5 years earlier, I probably wouldn't have recognized it in myself. So you
Mm.
get to a stage where you do start recognizing certain characteristics. And I was, you know, I was brought up by a lot of people sort of saying, well, you can't change your personality. And that was a belief system that a lot of people heard. But I know for a fact that you absolutely can change your personality, because so much of your personality is set by these unconscious belief systems that you've had
Right.
programmed into you. And once you start seeing them, you can consciously start to change them.
Yeah, I think just by being raised by a different family, you would have a different personality, wouldn't
Very
you?
much so.
Yeah, so it's absolutely changeable. But it's interesting because people just see you or anybody, or just think, okay, this is the way it is, you know.
Mm.
But anybody who's been into personal development knows that they weren't the same person this year or 2 years ago, you know, that they were 5 years ago. So, you know, it might not be. I think if you and you know, YouTube's an interesting one because I started my channel back in 2016, I think, and a friend of mine had noted that if you go back and look at all the videos, you can see the changes. Like you may not notice them, now. You know what I mean? Like I wouldn't notice them, but you go look at all the videos. It's a document of your life, you know, and you can see how shy you were behind the camera, or how inarticulate you were, or all these different things, and then you look at where you're at now, and it's interesting to watch the evolution.
I love that. And that's the one thing that really peed me off about having my first channel taken down. Not because of the stuff I'm talking about now, but because I had like 10 years of like animal videos, animal health videos that
Yeah,
I had on there. And it is a really good for exactly that reason to see, well, no wonder you don't resonate with certain people. Because when I look at the person I was back then and I look at the person I am now, they're virtually unrecognizable. And isn't it funny how as humans, we struggle to accept this, because none of us look the same as we did when we were 20. I mean, it absolutely fascinates me. You know, over the last few years, there's been all these pictures. Is it the real Biden or is it a fake and things like this? But
mm,
actually, when you take a lot of people of what they look like when they're 20 and what they look like when they're 80, they do not look like the same person. You know, it's amazing, like people's noses continue to grow, their ears continue to grow. Now, I'm not saying a lot of these people are the same people. I'm not saying that. I do believe a lot of them are different. However, I've seen people where they've shown a picture of what they look like as a young person and what they look like now, and everything about them's changed. It's unbelievable how much someone can physically change. You know, we've only got to
yeah,
look back about what we looked like when we were 5 years old. So it's completely accepted to us that we're going to change our physical appearance as we go through different stages of our life. And sometimes people look a lot better when they're 60 than they did when they're 20. I've got loads of people who do. But then people find it so difficult to think as you go through those physical changes that
yeah,
you're going to change as a person emotionally, mentally, intellectually. And that's hysterical because, again, you don't expect a 5-year-old to know what a 30-year-old knows. So why did people then struggle with this change of personality? And one of the reasons I wanted to ask you about is, for me, this whole obsession of physical health and mental health. There's so many people that say, talk about mental health now. And then I've been guilty of it because I'm like holistic health and, you know, a normal health management system. And I think all this separation doesn't serve us. If we just talked about wellness, if we just talked about change
overall.
overall rather than separating it, because people accept that you'll change physically, but they don't accept your personality. And as I think it's because they see that bit is something you're born with, and this bit if you go through the natural process. And actually we know that's not true at all. As you say, if you were born with different parents, raised in a different environment, you would be expressing a very different personality.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's the it's really just that the school system doesn't teach us to evolve in life. You know, like imagine if the school system taught us, and I spoke about this, I think, in one of the first videos that we ever did, about imagine if they taught you about yourself,
Mm.
just for one thing. Imagine if they taught you about your mind. Imagine if they taught you about all the things that are important, like how your health, how your body actually works, and how health, you know, what to eat, you know, what to eat. I would imagine if we were all learning all of that in school, the world would be a very different place anyway. We wouldn't have all the shit that we eat,
Yeah,
you know. But you know, just for argument's sake, you know, if the school system did a better job of educating a person on the most important subject, which is themselves, then personal growth would be normal, and everybody would notice somebody's journey and understand that that they're evolving, and everybody evolves, and at some point you're friends, but now you no longer resonate. Like if I was even now, like if I were to go join, if I were to look for a program to join online, it wouldn't be like a a personal development program or a marketing, copywriting program or something. It'd be a music program,
yeah.
so, and that's only because of where I'm at now. But a few years ago, it wasn't that.
Mm.
And there's nothing, but I love all of those things, so it's just a different stage in your life. And I heard a good quote by this very successful guy. I think he's only like 32 or something. And he sold his company for like 100 and something million recently. And he said, if you're the same person now that you were 5 years ago, you're doing something wrong.
Exactly.
And I believe that's true, because we're not meant to stay the same. We're meant to keep growing. You don't grow in stature forever, but you should evolve as a person continually.
I think that's so, so true. And when we look at cultures, I mean, it always makes me laugh because we've got no idea what our real history is and where we came from. But if you look at most um sort of indigenous tribes across the world, that's why the elders are so respected for their wisdom. You can't become a shaman in a lot of these places, or an elder, or a storyteller, until you've reached a certain stage. And that's because you have to go through these changes on a personal level. You can learn some things on an intellectual level, and other things you learn through the journey of life. And you see this a lot in the in the animal kingdom as well. Lovely Emily Castrota, who I've done a couple of interviews with, she's incredible. Her understanding of the animal kingdom is just amazing, and she expresses it so beautifully, where she says, the whole point, if you've got a herd of horses, their role, they will have a natural role. Like one might be the peacekeeper, one might be defines the food, one might lead the herd, one might be the lookout for predators, but that role will change as they go through their life. Because as they go through their life, their abilities and physically and on a personality wise change. And so this is the whole point. We're not meant to be the same things as we go through all the different stages of our life. And I think when you understand that, for me, it was like a penny had dropped about it's okay for these relationships to go, because I used to find it really affected my sense of security. And I would always say, well, what's wrong with me?
Right.
Why is it? And now I just look at it completely differently, in terms of, well, actually, it's not a question of one person being right, one person being wrong. I mean, look at the conversation of marriage. I happen to have been married. I've been with the same person since I was 18. And people find that really weird. And a lot of my friends who are single find that really challenging. And they might project onto it about, oh, well, you just settle for, this. And I'm like, no, that's your story. There's some relationships that are worth fighting for and growing through and working through problems. If you gave up the hurt or the obstacle on the first sign of every problem, it would be quite a lonely life, quite frankly. But equally, there's some relationships that aren't worth fighting for, and it's natural for them to go, and you can't then make way for new ones in your life and create a bit of space. So it's definitely been a learning curve, and it still will be, but I'm really pleased for what it's taught me.
Yeah, I think you hit on so many good points there, especially if you've got, let's say, and this works in business too, but if you've got, say, you only have space for 5 clients or 5 friends, and you are experiencing a client from hell, but you have a scarcity mindset, and you're like, well, I have to keep this client, because if I don't, then I'm not going to earn this money, this amount of money, right? I got to keep this friend, because if I don't, I'm going to have 4 friends, and then I won't be able to do this, but whatever. But as soon as that person leaves your life, you're making space for a new person, you know, someone who resonates with you, and someone who vibrates on your level. And so that's that. But I also think that you touched on an amazing point, which is what I like to call the illusion of knowledge, where people know something intellectually, but they're not living it. So they can, you get this all the time in the personal development world, and especially in the spiritual community, I think, where people they have all this knowledge, and they spit out all this stuff, but then you look at their life, and they still bear this, or they got the thing, you know, because they're scared of, they haven't seen past the charade, if you know what I mean. That's just one example, but there are many others. But it's easy to consume a bunch of podcasts and read heaps of books and go, okay, I know all this stuff. Like, there's a guy, he lives in Scotland, actually. His name's Dan Pena. He's a business coach. He's not for everyone. He's very against the grain. He swears a lot, and he would offend a lot of people. But he did a talk at a university once, at a college, and this guy put up his hand and said, I've read 500 personal development books. And he goes, well, I'd rather do business with somebody who's done 500 deals.
Yeah.
So that was kind of rare, but what he meant was, you read all those books, but what results have you got? Like, what results in real life have you got?
It's so true. You've got to embody it. And the only way you're going to go through this is you're going to try things out, and you'll learn from your mistakes. And, you know, I mean,
that's the thing, isn't it?
You've got to learn.
People read all this stuff. They don't want to implement it because they're too scared of failing, perhaps. You know, there's nothing wrong with failure. Everyone fails. You have to fail to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, you look at romantic relationships. There's some people that can agree to part ways and still have an amazing respect for each other, and still, you know, be able to interact very civilly, sometimes very friendly. And then there's other people where it's so acrimonious because there's so much hurt involved and everything. But, you know, at the end of the day, it's like, who are you hurting by not letting go? I'm doing, my lovely friend Jackie White is running a happiness and Ho'oponopono course at the moment, and I was doing that last night. Yeah. The thing that we were talking about is forgiveness, and it's so crucial, because, you know, it's like, who are you actually hurting by not forgiving? It's always ourselves. It's always ourselves. We can argue black and white, no but you know, it's not about toxic positivity and suppressing those emotions. It's not about that at all. It's about reaching a place where you can say it doesn't serve anyone by not forgiving. And there's some amazing you know, examples all over where, you know, people have forgiven someone who's murdered a family member, and the lessons and the way so many lives have been transformed from that act of forgiveness is absolutely incredible. And I think, yeah, these can be tough lessons to implement. I'm not saying any of them are easy, but if you want to live a happy, fulfilled life and take responsibility, you know, I'm so fed up with people expecting some knight on a shining horse, or some politician or someone to come back from the dead to come and save them. It's like, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if there's med beds. It doesn't matter if we have a financial reset. It doesn't matter if you haven't made the changes yourself, you're still going to be unhappy. And how do we know this? Look at most lottery winners. Most lottery winners are far more unhappy after they've won the lottery than they were before, because it's shown them that most of their friendships were fake. It's shown them that money doesn't buy happiness, etc. Now, there were a few that they have been able to use it to transform their lives for the positive and those of others, but they're the exception and they're the rule. And that, to me, that's a perfect example. If you have to do the work yourself, if all the while you're trying to, yes, you can get help from someone. So if you've got an illness, absolutely, you can accept help from, whether it's traditional doctors, alternative doctors, whatever floats your boat, but they can't do it for you. They cannot do the work for you.
Yeah. I think, just to go back to something you said before as well, I think it's because, you know, when you think about marriage or you think about your job, we're always taught that it's just that one thing for the rest of our life,
Yeah.
you know. So, you know, and that works for some people, but especially with the job thing. And obviously, if you're kind of in a relationship where one of you is growing and the other one isn't as much, then it makes things difficult. And I'm sure a lot of people would have experienced that over the last few years. But 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 when you go to university and you spend some time, you know, doing your degree, and then you go, okay, well, this is it. This is the rest of my life now. This is for the next 40 years until I retire. And it's just it doesn't. There's no evolution. Yeah, you'll progress throughout that job for sure, but we're not meant to do the same thing forever. We're not meant to. Like, I get bored every 3 years. You know, I have to change something every 3 years about my career. Otherwise, it would just get boring. And I that's what I've realized over the last 7 since I've been on this journey. But before then, I was, you know, for the first 10 years of working in professionally, I was just doing accounting, and accounting was okay for a few years, you know. But then I needed to change, and I didn't change. So yeah.
So what would be the messages you'd want to leave everyone with, you know, for people, if people are watching this and whatever aspect of their life, whether it's professional, whether it's friendships, whether it's romantic partners, whether it's family members, about, you know, letting go of those friendships and being okay with it, what would be some of your key bits of advice you'd like to leave people?
I think really just asking yourself the question, is this relationship serving me?
Mm.
Is a big one. But I know how difficult it is. You know, I've been in other relationships, like business relationships, where I really wanted it to work. You know, I really wanted to stick it through. You know, hold on and stick with it. But then I had to ask myself the tough question, like, is it serving me? And I had to make the hard decision to move on. So it doesn't just, you know, it's every relationship. And you know what? It's even a relationship with yourself, because there are so many things that we do in life that aren't serving us. And I think that's one of the toughest things, is to realize that you've been doing things for the last 10 years or however many years that really aren't getting you where you want to go, or where you know, what you desired for your life. So I think start there. But then everything else will come naturally. I think everything else is much easier when you can build that good relationship with yourself, and you can realize that even you wouldn't be friends with you 5 years ago, you know what I mean? Because you're a different person now. And when you can realize that, I think it makes everything easier.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And the only thing I would add to that is you've got to be honest with yourself. If you can't be honest with yourself, you can't possibly be honest with other people. So, you know, using that as a positive introspection to sort of say, right, okay, what am I going to learn from this, is really, really helpful, because in all aspects of us living our lives, when we drop the blame, when we drop the right or wrong, this delusional black and white thinking, then it just becomes okay. You know, and I think that is understanding that we all go through these cycles. It's going to happen to everyone. Not taking it personally, and sort of think, what have I learned from this? How have I grown from this? And keep that perspective and talk it through. I've been really, really lucky that I've got you and a couple of other friends, so when I'm going through these things, I can talk it through. That is so helpful, to find someone in your life that you can talk these through with, and if that's a friend or a therapist or whoever, because when you do that, then you really are going to get the most out of that growth experience, and that's really empowering.
Yeah. And I think it's just also when and I'm not saying burn every bridge you get, or every chance you get you burn a bridge, but I think when you have a clear idea about where you're going in life, you'll know very quickly which people fit that picture and who don't, you know, and which don't. So, and you know, you could say that about any, you know what they say, you know, I think it was, what's Walt Disney's brother's name? I can't remember his name.
I don't know.
Anyway, he had a good quote: when you know your values, decisions are easy. Because when you know what you value, it's very easy to make a decision. If something doesn't fit your values, you go, I'm not doing it. You know, and last few years is a prime example of that. You know, how many people let their values slide so they could fit in? Or how many people let their values slide because they didn't want to be ostracized or get a fine perhaps or whatever, or to keep their job? I understand keeping your job is very, very important, but if your core, I've met single mothers with mortgages who left their job because they felt so strongly about their values.
Yeah.
You know? And it just depends how strong you feel about your values.
Absolutely. And if you find that you did make a decision and you regret it now, whatever area it is, it's fine so long as you learn from it. But I think that's probably the most important thing of the whole conversation, what you've just said there. Know your values and stick to them. And then these problems just go away, really, or they become a lot easier to handle. I love that, David. Thank you. So I hope anyone that's watching this, I hope, I'd be really interested to see in the comments below, what have you learned? What words of wisdom can you share with others? What's worked for you? What hasn't worked for you? Please do share, because I think this is something that every single person watching this will either be going through or have gone through or going to go through. So, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's learn some ways to make it easier for everyone. And thank you so much, David. I love it. And I really, really, really appreciate your friendship. Isn't it amazing how, we met online a few years ago, but this is just such a perfect example of how, not labeling a friendship and just letting it go where it needs to go can be really wonderful. So I really appreciate you.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. And if you feel inspired, please do share with your friends and family. My goal is to inspire as many people as I can to live their best lives, to stay curious and to raise their consciousness and that of the collective. So to do this, I need to reach as many people as possible, and this needs your help. If you feel drawn, would you be willing to share your favourite episode with 5 different people? This helps us spread the word and also helps me encourage some exciting new guests to take part in this podcast. If you feel drawn to do that, I will be very, very grateful. All the links and discount codes where applicable for all the products that I support are on my 2 websites, catherineedwards.life and catherineedwardsacademy.com. All of the products are personally tried and tested by me, my family, and my clients. And finally, please do press the follow or subscribe button, depending which platform you're listening on. And above all, stay curious and stay free.